Ever heard of litigation funding? It's a relatively new, multi-billion-dollar industry where investors fund lawsuits. Here's the idea. Say someone was wronged by a big corporation but has no money to sue it. A litigation funder will pay for their court battle. In essence, they're betting on the lawsuit the way traders bet on stocks. If it's successful, they make money, sometimes a lot of money. If it fails, the funders get nothing. Their investment is lost. As we first reported in December, litigation funding can help in cases where otherwise the little guy who's suing would just get crushed or lowballed by defendants with deep pockets. Problem is, this market is exploding with nearly no rules or oversight.
The story will continue in a moment.
This is quite an honor to be able to drive you around in my truck.
We start our story in the rolling hills of Ventura County, California.
This is one of our fields.
This one too? Where Craig Underwood's family farm had been growing jalapenos for 3 decades. So you used to have peppers as far as the eye could see.
As you were driving through the valley, peppers were every place.
But I heard that you had one customer.
One customer, Hui Fong Foods.
Hui Fong makes the world-famous sriracha hot sauce. In 2016, they abruptly severed ties with Underwood. His business dried up overnight. Is there anything growing here at all? Can you tell?
There's nothing planted here, and up here, it's just weeds.
Facing ruin, he sued Hui Fong for breach of contract and won $23 million. But they appealed.
They appealed.
You couldn't collect any of the money.
No. We were looking at whether we could survive or not. You know, every week we were trying to find enough cash to pay the bills, make sure we could make payroll.
He couldn't afford to keep fighting until he heard of an investment firm that backs people in his situation.
We make the playing field level, and that's what people should be wanting in litigation.
Christopher Bogart is the CEO of Burford Capital. He funds litigants and takes a chunk of their reward if they win.
We are a multi-billion-dollar company because litigation is expensive and there's an awful lot of demand from businesses for this kind of solution.
So is it a loan?
It's a non-recourse financing. So
what does
non-recourse?
What does that mean?
What it means is that if the case that we're financing doesn't succeed, then we don't get our money back. And so it's different from a loan in the sense that a loan, obviously, you're always having to pay back the principal.
If your side loses, you get nothing.
That's correct.
Still, Craig Underwood was torn because if he won the appeal, Burford would get a big chunk. But seeing no other choice, he took $4 million from them. Soon after, he won the appeal and the $23 million. But then he had to pay his lawyers and square away with Burford.
We had to give them $8 million to pay for the 4 that we got and the 4 that, was there.
Did you think when you realized they were going to charge you 100% that was predatory?
Some people might think that. I didn't feel that way because they stepped in and helped us out when we couldn't have gotten money from anybody else. They basically rescued us.
Founded in 2009, Burford is the world's largest litigation funder with $5 billion invested in multiple lawsuits. Is it actually safer in today's environment to invest in litigation than in the stock market?
Well, the benefit that you get from litigation is that litigation doesn't fluctuate the same way that the markets do.
What's your average investment?
When we're financing a single piece of litigation, it would be very rare for us to be below $5 million, and it goes up from there.
Let's say you have a huge case with tens of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. What kind of percentage do you expect to win at the end?
On an average basis, we'll largely double our money.
Are there cases where you actually walked away with more money than the plaintiff, the person who was wronged?
So That doesn't happen very often.
But occasionally.
It certainly can happen.
There's no legal limit on how big a chunk litigation funders can take, and the deals are confidential. Bogert argues that the reason they demand so much is because of the big risks they take. But actually, they pick their cases very carefully. So these are all lawyers?
Indeed they are.
And what are they doing? Do you
They
know?
are fundamentally vetting potential cases that we might finance for corporate clients. We certainly do diligence on those matters to try to choose ones that are meritorious and that will be successful.
How often are you right?
We're right about 90% of the time, and we're wrong about 10% of the time.
What if the client that you've given all this money to, invested in, wants to settle, and you think that's a mistake?
Clients are free to run their litigations as they see fit. They're free to work with their lawyers as they see fit, and we don't interfere with that relationship. It's not uncommon for them to come and ask for our advice, but it's advice, and the client is free to disregard that advice and take its own path. But
Maya Steinitz, a law professor at the University of Iowa, says there are ethics rules for lawyers, but not for these investors.
The funders are not regulated. There's nothing precluding them legally from pressuring a client to settle. The rules of ethics are very clear that the lawyer has to abide by the wishes of the client. But human nature is human nature.
Yes.
There may be an inclination to be pulled towards the person who is paying.
Why is this important? Why should someone out there who's not involved in a lawsuit care?
For multiple reasons. First of all, there's this new industry and a new type of player, litigation funders, who are reshaping every aspect of the litigation process. Which cases get brought, how long are they pursued, when are they settled. But all of this is happening without transparency. So we have one of the three branches of government, the judiciary, that's really being quietly transformed. And there's
Very little oversight.
very little oversight.
Who is working to impose regulations, insist on transparency in this industry?
One entity that's been very vocal is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that represents big businesses because the sector that's most concerned about this is big corporations. Now there's money to sue them, and there's money to persevere and not to settle early at a discount.
Big business it would
Big
like to
business.
have regulation. How
Yes.
interesting, because they
Yes.
don't like regulation. Except
Generally.
when it helps them.
Generally.
Burford usually funds huge cases involving big, sophisticated corporations. There are only a handful of investment firms like it whose business is solely investing in litigation. But hedge funds, foreign government funds, and wealthy individuals are also getting into this market. But because there are no regulations, in most cases, litigation funders remain anonymous in court. In 2012, a billionaire, Peter Thiel, secretly funded wrestler Hulk Hogan's invasion of privacy lawsuit against the website Gawker that drove it out of business. Thiel had his own long-standing score to settle with the site.
If you've been injured in an accident,
But litigation funding isn't just for giant cases worth gazillions.
You can get cash as soon as the same day.
These ads are for a whole other category of litigation funding companies that offer quick cash
You can get cash in as little as 24 hours.
directly to individuals who are suing in smaller cases, usually over personal injury accidents.
From 500 to
They need the money to pay their household bills so they can hold out for larger settlements.
The beauty of pre-settlement funding is that if you lose, you don't have to pay back anything.
Call now.
But in the ads, it's easy to miss that if you win, you might have to pay a hefty sum. This group of litigation funders charges so much because, again, they say the risk is so high, especially given that the applicants for these advances are often broke, injured, out of work, and with no assets. But we found rates running high even when there's seemingly minimal or no risk. Take the case of former NYPD officer Donald Sefcik, who was entitled to money from the 9/11 Victims' Compensation Fund. He became ill after he raced to ground zero. And how long did you stay?
I stayed there approximately 9 days.
Inhaling all that
Yes.
Dust
Yeah.
and...
It was so much dust down there that you could not see your hand in front of your face.
So obviously you had medical issues.
Yeah. I couldn't run. I couldn't breathe.
So you were entitled from that victims' compensation fund
Yes,
to
I
get
was.
$90,000.
Yes.
You were told you would get $90,000.
Yes.
You got $10,000 up front.
Yes.
He knew he would eventually get more. But in the meantime, he needed money for his medical care. So an ad in the paper caught his eye.
And it said R&D legal funding can get your money faster. We can cut through the red tape.
Oh.
So I called R&D legal funding. But then after I signed all the documents and sent over to them, they came back at an interest rate that I couldn't even figure out. The document was very confusing. I couldn't even understand it.
I'm a lawyer, 40 years. I couldn't understand it.
Michael Barish is Sefcic's lawyer.
They lent him $25,000. He had to repay $64,800.
That's 150%. And you paid it?
I had no choice. I had no choice. I paid it. Out of the $90,000, I ended up with about $30,000 of it. I feel totally just taken advantage of.
The argument from this industry is that they take a big risk when they invest this money.
This is not a car accident case against a small insurance company. This was the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund created by Congress and backed by the U.S. Treasury.
The company told us Sefcic's contract was clear, but his case was part of a lawsuit against RD Legal brought by the New York Attorney General. It settled in November. The company denied wrongdoing, but had to provide over $600,000 in debt relief to harmed consumers, stop doing business with recipients of 9/11 victim compensation funds, and pay a $1 penalty. So how do litigation funders like this get away with charging such exorbitant rates? If you take out, say, a car loan, usury laws that prevent predatory lending cap the interest rate, in New York at 16%. But remember, these aren't loans per se, they're investments. Litigation funders, for giant and personal cases, argue that this market is offering a lifeline to those who have nowhere else to turn. And legal scholars like Maya Steinitz agree.
Accessing the courts in a civil process is a luxury good in today's America. Lawyers charge hundreds of dollars by the hour, so if you've been injured, if you've been discriminated against, if a contract that you have entered into has been breached, it's simply too expensive to bring your case in court. So I think litigation funding is essential. However, personally, I think that litigation funding should be regulated, but I certainly don't think it should be prohibited.